She was a young widow on the brink of losing everything: her home, her land, and the only life her daughter had ever known. But just as hope was slipping through her fingers, a silent farmer showed up at her door with a proposal that would change everything. It wasn't love, it wasn't romantic, at least not at first. If you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe, like the video, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Now let's jump into the story. The morning sun rose slowly over the hills of northern Colorado, painting the sky in soft gold and quiet blue. It was early, but Hannah Grayson was already standing on the porch of her family ranch. She held her 3-year-old daughter, Ellie, on her hip. The girl giggled and played with the buttons on Hannah's worn flannel shirt, not sensing the worry in her mother's heart. In Hannah's other hand was a letter. The paper felt heavier than it should. Her fingers clutched it tightly, like it might fly away if she let go. But she couldn't let go, not of the letter, and not of the land behind her. This ranch had belonged to her late husband Joel's family for 3 generations. Now it might be gone forever. The letter came from the bank. It said she had 60 days to prove financial stability, or the land would be foreclosed. In simple words, they told her she needed a business partner, or a husband, to show she could run the place with support. Without that, the 1,000 acres of cattle pasture, barns, and her small home would be taken away. She looked out across the fields. The fences needed mending. The roof on the barn was sagging, and the cattle feed bill was weeks overdue. Joel had passed away 10 months ago from a heart attack, just days after his 30th birthday. His death had been sudden, and the hospital bills had taken every dollar they had saved. Since then, Hannah had done everything on her own: feeding the animals, fixing broken tools, raising Ellie, but it never felt like enough. "What are we going to do, baby girl?" she whispered, kissing Ellie's soft brown curls. As if in answer, a sound came from the distance, the hum of a truck. A cloud of dust rose on the long dirt road that led to the house. Hannah narrowed her eyes and saw the familiar blue pickup roll into view. It was Caleb Moore, her neighbor from the land just west of theirs. Caleb was the kind of man who didn't speak much, but when he did, people listened. He was in his mid-30s, with strong arms from years of work and a steady, calm way about him. His dark hair peeked out from beneath a gray cowboy hat, and his beard was trimmed but rough, like the land he worked every day. He parked his truck and stepped out slowly. His boots crunched over the gravel as he walked up to the porch. Hannah hadn't seen him much since Joel died, but she knew he had helped in small, quiet ways. Once, she had found her chicken coop door fixed overnight. Another time, a basket of vegetables had been left at her door. She never asked who it was, but she knew. "Morning, Hannah," he said softly. "Caleb," she replied, shifting Ellie to her other hip. "Didn't expect visitors this early." He glanced at the letter in her hand, then back at her face. "I heard you might be having trouble with the bank." Hannah's cheeks turned red. News traveled fast in small towns, and pride was hard to hold on to when everyone knew your business. "I'm managing," she said quickly, lifting her chin. Caleb didn't push. He just nodded and took off his hat, running a hand through his hair. It was a nervous habit she remembered from the few times they'd talked in the past. "I have a thought," he said after a long pause. "Something that might help." Hannah looked at him, confused but curious. Caleb wasn't the type to speak unless he had something real to say. "I know what the bank wants," he continued. "They're looking for stability. Someone to back you up. And I figured ... what if we got married?" Hannah's eyes widened. "Excuse me?" "Not a real marriage," he added quickly, his face turning a little pink. "Just on paper, just enough to give you what the bank needs. Help you keep the land." She stared at him, unsure what to say. Of all the things she had imagined might happen today, a marriage proposal, even a fake one from Caleb Moore, was not on the list. "Why would you do that?" she asked quietly. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked out over the rolling hills, then back at her, because Joel was a good man. He loved this land, and Ellie deserves to grow up here. As if she understood, Ellie reached out her little hand toward Caleb. Without hesitation, he stepped closer and let her grab his finger. Her hand was small, but the gesture was full of trust. "I can't ask you to do this," Hannah whispered. "You're not asking," he said gently. "I'm offering." Hannah looked at her daughter, then at the land stretching out behind the house, the place where she had once built dreams with Joel. She thought about what it would mean to lose it, to start over, to leave behind everything she had fought so hard to hold together. It would just be temporary, she said, mostly to herself. "As long as you need," Caleb replied. And just like that, a new chapter began quietly, under a morning sky, with a promise made not for love, but maybe for something that could become it. 3 days later, the wind was cold and sharp as Hannah Grayson stepped into the small courthouse downtown. Her daughter Ellie held tightly in her arms. Beside her stood Caleb Moore, his face calm, but his eyes just as unsure as hers. There were no flowers, no music, no smiling guests. Just the county judge, his secretary, and Caleb's elderly neighbor, Mrs. Tompkins, who had insisted on being a witness after Caleb quietly told her the plan. Hannah wore a simple gray dress and a wool coat. Caleb had cleaned up and put on his best shirt. It still smelled faintly of cedarwood and hay. He didn't say much, not that he ever did, but when he looked at her, his gaze was steady, kind. The judge read the vows in a quiet voice. "Do you, Hannah Grayson, take this man. She hesitated, only for a second. Not because she didn't want to go through with it, but because it felt strange to hear those words again. She had already spoken them once, years ago, in a white dress under a willow tree to Joel. This wasn't the same. It wasn't supposed to be. "I do," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Caleb didn't flinch when it was his turn. "I do." When he slipped a ring on her finger, it wasn't new. He'd told her quietly before the ceremony that it had belonged to his grandmother. A plain gold band, worn smooth with age. She looked down at it and felt a small ache. This marriage may have been born out of necessity, but something about that simple ring made it feel more real than she was ready for. They signed the papers. It was done. Back at the ranch, Caleb carried his single bag into the spare room at the prairie end of the hall. He didn't bring much, just a few clothes, a worn-out book, and a set of tools. Hannah helped him settle in, offering a blanket and a few quiet words. For the first few days, they moved around each other like strangers sharing a train car. They spoke only when needed. Meals were short and quiet. Ellie, though, seemed to love having Caleb around. She followed him outside, watched him fix the gate, and giggled whenever he made silly faces when he thought no one was looking. It was awkward, but it wasn't cold. Caleb respected her space. He never acted like anything more than a guest. He woke early to tend his own land, then came back in the afternoons to help with chores on hers. He patched the holes in the barn roof without being asked. He refilled the firewood pile, fixed the tractor's loose tire, and once even left warm bread on the counter with a note that just said, "Found this recipe. Worth a try." Hannah noticed the little things. He didn't leave his boots by the door. He cleaned them before coming in. He didn't expect dinner, but always offered to wash the dishes. And he always made time for Ellie, even if it meant sitting cross-legged on the floor to stack wooden blocks into crooked towers. One evening, after Ellie had gone to bed, Hannah joined Caleb on the porch. The sky was deep orange, fading into violet as the sun dropped behind the hills. They didn't speak at first, just sat in the old wooden chairs, sipping tea and listening to the wind. "I didn't expect this to be so normal," she said at last. Caleb turned to her, his brow raised slightly. "You mean not awkward?" She laughed a little. "No, it's definitely awkward, but not in a bad way. Just new." He nodded slowly. I wasn't sure you'd say. Yes, I wasn't sure either, she admitted. But when I looked out at the land, I realized I couldn't let it go. Not for me. For Ellie, for Joel. Caleb looked down at the porch floor, then back at her. You're doing right by her. All of it. The silence that followed was more comfortable than the one before. In the days that followed, their routine grew more natural. They worked together. In the fields, shared meals at the kitchen table, and took Ellie for walks along the fence line. The arrangement that had started as a lifeline slowly became a partnership, uneven, uncertain, but growing. One rainy afternoon, Hannah came into the living room and found Caleb asleep on the couch, Ellie curled up beside him, her head resting on his chest. The sight stopped her cold. Not because it was strange, but because it wasn't. It looked so normal, so peaceful, that something inside her shifted. Later that night, as she stood by the kitchen window drying dishes, she realized something. She no longer felt alone. It wasn't love. Not yet, but it was comfort, it was safety. And after the months of grief, fear, and exhaustion, it was enough. Autumn arrived slowly, brushing the trees with orange and gold. The wind carried the smell of dry leaves and wood smoke, and the days grew shorter, cooler. Life on the ranch followed a quiet rhythm. And so did the marriage between Hannah and Caleb. Their arrangement, once awkward and uncertain, had become something steady. Caleb now joined Hannah each morning after tending his own land. He worked alongside her in silence, fixing fences, feeding cattle, cleaning stalls. They didn't talk much while they worked, but the silence was never uncomfortable. It felt like trust. One evening, as they sat at the table eating soup while Ellie scribbled with crayons nearby, Caleb broke the quiet. You ever think about selling? He asked gently. Hannah looked up. The ranch? He nodded. Just wondering, it's a lot to carry. She took a slow breath, then shook her head. This land belonged to Joel's grandfather. He built everything with his bare hands. Joel always said this place was his heartbeat. Even after he passed, I felt him here, I still do. Caleb didn't speak, but he nodded in understanding. He looked around the old kitchen, with its peeling wallpaper and creaky floorboards, as if seeing it differently now. That night, after putting Ellie to bed, Hannah found Caleb out on the porch. He was staring at the stars, a worn flannel blanket draped over his shoulders. She joined him, handing him a mug of tea. Thank you for everything you've been doing, she said. Caleb looked at her. It's your home. I'm just helping. Keep it together. No, she replied quietly. You've done more than that. Caleb hesitated, then said, I know this wasn't part of the plan, but I don't mind it. The chores, the quiet, even the tea. Hannah smiled, then laughed softly. It's not much of a life for someone else to step into. Caleb looked at her, his voice low. It's enough for me. The words stayed with Hannah long after they went back inside. As weeks passed, Caleb began to open up. One cold morning, while stacking firewood, he told Hannah about his past. I had a brother, he said. His name was Daniel. He was younger, wild, always chasing something bigger. One summer, he was working on a neighbor's tractor and it flipped, crushed him. Hannah paused, holding a log in her hands. I'm sorry. I still think about it, Caleb said, his voice calm but distant. After that, I stopped talking so much. Stopped chasing anything. Just worked the land. It was easier than dealing with people. Hannah nodded. Sometimes silence feels safer. Caleb looked at her, his eyes meeting hers in quiet understanding. One day, while checking the chicken coop, Caleb found Ellie playing in the grass. She held a wilted dandelion in her tiny hand and marched up to him. This is for you, she declared, her eyes bright. He smiled and bent down. Thank you, sweetheart. She looked at him for a moment, then asked, Are you my daddy now? Caleb's heart tightened. No, I'm not, he said gently. But I'm here, okay? Ellie nodded and skipped off, chasing the butterfly. That night, Caleb shared the moment with Hannah. She listened carefully, her eyes soft. She asks about Joel sometimes, she said. She remembers pieces. I don't always know what to say. You're doing your best, Caleb told her. That's enough. As fall deepened, Hannah found herself watching Caleb more. The way he worked, calm and focused. The way he never raised his voice, even when things went wrong. The way he brought Ellie little carved animals from his shed without saying a word. She also noticed the change in herself. She smiled more. She slept better. And the heaviness in her chest, the one that had never fully left since Joel's death, began to ease. One evening, a heavy rain rolled in. The power flickered, and the three of them sat by candlelight in the living room. Caleb picked up his old guitar and began to play quietly. The tune was soft and slow. Ellie curled up beside him on the rug, her head against his leg. Hannah watched. From the couch, a blanket wrapped around her. She felt something unexpected, something warm and slow, blooming inside her chest. Later that night, she found Caleb in the kitchen, drying dishes. Where did you learn to play like that? She asked. My mother used to sing, he replied. When I was a boy, I picked it up from her. You're good, Hannah said. You should play more often. Caleb looked down, then smiled. Maybe. In the quiet that followed, something passed between them. Not romance, not yet. But something like it. Something honest and steady. As the first frost touched the window panes, and the leaves finished falling, Hannah stood on the porch one morning and looked out over the land. She didn't know what the future would bring. But for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel afraid. Something was changing. And for the first time, she didn't want to stop at. Winter came early that year. Snow covered the hills like a soft blanket, and the air carried the quiet stillness that only cold weather brings. At the Grayson Ranch, smoke curled gently from the chimney, and the windows glowed with golden light as evening settled in. Inside the farmhouse, warmth filled every corner. Ellie sat on the floor, humming to herself as she carefully hung paper snowflakes on a small pine tree they had cut from the edge of the property. Hannah and Caleb sat nearby, stringing popcorn and cranberries for the tree. It was simple, but it felt right. As Caleb reached up to place a wooden ornament near the top, Ellie pointed at him suddenly. Daddy, she said with delight. The room froze. Hannah's breath caught. Caleb lowered the ornament slowly, unsure how to respond. He looked at Ellie, then at Hannah. No, sweetheart, Hannah said gently. That's Caleb. But Ellie shook her head and grinned. Daddy. Caleb knelt beside her, his voice soft. I'm not your daddy, little one, but I love you very much. Ellie wrapped her arms around his neck without saying a word. Caleb closed his eyes and held her, the moment settling over him like fresh snow. When Ellie ran off to get another decoration, Hannah stood and walked to Caleb. Her hands trembled slightly as she touched his arm. She sees something in you, she whispered. Something I think I've been trying not to see myself. Caleb turned to her, his expression unsure. What do you mean? She met his eyes, her voice low but steady. What if this didn't have to be temporary? Caleb looked stunned. Hannah, what if we stopped pretending? What if this was real? He straightened slowly, searching her face for doubt. Are you sure? We did this for the land, for Ellie. I never wanted you to feel pressured into anything. I'm not, Hannah said. At first, yes. But not anymore. You've become a part of this family, Caleb. You didn't just save the ranch, you saved me. Caleb reached out, brushing a loose strand of hair from her cheek. I've loved you longer than you know, he said quietly. Since the first time I saw you out here, hanging laundry, singing to yourself with Ellie in your arms, I told myself it wasn't possible. That you'd never want someone like me. Hannah smiled through tears. You're wrong. I want you. Not because I need saving, but because I see who you are. Steady, kind, strong. You made this house feel like a home again." Caleb leaned forward and kissed her, gently at first, then with a warmth that spread from his heart to hers. It was not a kiss born from desperation or duty. It was full of hope, full of care, full of love. From the corner of the room, Ellie clapped her little hands and laughed. "Daddy again." She EQEALED. Hannah and Caleb both laughed too, and he lifted her into his arms, spinning her once in the air before hugging her close. That night, the three of them sat together by the fireplace, wrapped in the same blanket. Caleb read Ellie her bedtime story, his voice soft and calm. Hannah rested her head on his shoulder, feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Outside, the snow kept falling, gently covering the earth in silence. The land was safe, the house was warm, and a new kind of love had taken root. One that didn't shout or shine too bright, but one that would last. A week later, Hannah walked out to the front porch and saw Caleb hammering a new sign into the ground at the end of the drive. She stepped closer, holding Ellie's hand. The sign read, "Grayson Moore Ranch, Est 2025. She smiled, her eyes wet but happy. Caleb looked at her with a quiet grin, wiping his hands on his jeans. "I thought it was time we made it official," he said. Hannah wrapped her arms around him. "So did I." Behind them, Ellie ran through the snow, chasing the family dog, her laughter echoing through the crisp air. It hadn't been the life Hannah imagined, but it had become something better, real, strong, and full of love. Caleb hadn't just helped her save the ranch. He had given her a future, one built not on paper promises, but on something far more powerful: trust, kindness, and the slow, steady bloom of love.